Well, I'm really glad to be here this morning, and it's great to see so many people and from so many diverse places across the U.S. and interested in this this endeavor. So, again, I'm John Griffin. I work in the Urban Wildlife Department, Urban Wildlife section of the Wildlife Department for the HSUS, and I've been there about 10 years. And my principal role is working with communities and individuals on different kinds of wildlife conflict, and it's mostly been sort of small mammal raccoon intrusions, things like that, a gamut of urban wildlife species that get into homes and cause issues or in communities. We ran a program called Humane Wildlife Services for over 10 years that was about getting in the field and understanding how animals use structures and how to resolve conflicts humanely and effectively using eviction exclusion methods. And recently just been working a little bit more on the deer issue and all that that entails. So what I'm here to talk about today is really our template deer conflict plan. We just finished it, and we're excited about sending it around and excited about debuting it here and getting some feedback from people that might try to adopt it or certain elements of it that to make a community respond more effectively to deer conflicts. So I really want to talk about the importance of putting these kinds of plans in place. And really, this is a deer conflict management plan. It's about managing the conflicts with deer. I'm talking about planning for conflict ahead of time. You're going to have it, and if you don't plan to put a plan in place to resolve conflicts with deer, they're going to arise either with the deer or with people that are not sort of part of the process, or not brought in as a stakeholder, or haven't been properly sought out for their opinion and input. And of course, just because I'm from the Humane Society of the United States doesn't mean I'm advocating for us going out there and sitting down with each member of the deer herd and trying to resolve conflicts with them individually. I'm talking about plans that specifically address conflicts and manage those conflicts with deer, and plans that have stakeholder agreements, whether they're alongside or include any kind of population control method or not. So with that, I'll begin. In 1997, the Wildlife City Bulletin published a entertaining satire by Jay Kirkpatrick and John Turner, who were sort of riffing about the conflict within a community of people that arises over issues with deer. And this was in 1997. It's still today the same questions, the same arguments, the same anger playing out in a community after community over this issue is really common. And that's our experience too with countless communities. And without a plan to specifically address these conflicts with deer, conflicts are going to tend to arise regardless of any kind of ongoing population control effort. And so it's obviously a very dramatic thing in an issue for us in the U.S. today, that community leaders are grappling with what to do about deer, and complaints and controversy erupt over what should be done. Protests, angry presentations at town meetings, and the pitting of neighbor against neighbor. Community leaders want to do something to alleviate complaints, but a clear solution isn't readily apparent. So before I talk about the deer conflict management plan, yeah.
The thing you just showed, the article, did we get that?
I can send it to you. Glad to do that.
All right.
Yeah. I'm able to send out most of this stuff digitally if anybody's interested. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the talk. So before I talk about the deer conflict management plan and plans and the ethical frameworks that underpin them, I am going to spend a little bit of time on that part of it, the sort of humane and ethical approaches that we would like to see as advocates for wildlife and as supporters of our Humane Society's work. So I want to start with some basic premises. Deer populations were driven to historic lows in the not too distant past, and this, along with commercial overhunting of many other wildlife species, led to the establishment of special protections codified in game laws. So by the 1900s, there were approximately 350,000 deer remaining in isolated areas. The restoration of deer is a management success story. Considerable expense and effort went into restoration, and more than one generation of deer biologists have worked toward the goals of restoration for their entire career. So through these restoration programs that began in the late 1800s, led to the significant population comeback. So in 1993, the U.S. deer population was estimated to be about 26 million animals. I wish it was 26,000, I'm sure. Both the science as well as the practice of deer management was, and to a large extent still is, really focused on just increasing populations and creating better habitat for deer. So that process really could be likened to turning an aircraft carrier around. And by the time you realize it needs to be done, it's going to be impossible to do that for quite some time. Deer management has been traditionally grounded in the concept of sustained yield, with hunters seeking the largest and oldest males and reluctantly hunting females, if at all. So, and females, of course, are the demographically significant component of the population. Deer hunting is the economic engine underpinning most state wildlife agencies. Hunting may not be practical, desirable, or even feasible within the urban and exurban and suburban matrix where deer are now found. And even bow hunting is often argued as one answer in the urban areas because of restrictions on gun laws and other concerns about how far bullets travel. But it raises significant concerns with the animal welfare and protection community with its high crippling and wounding rates. So what are some of the realities we face, and what are some of our hopes? We know that hunting will continue to be used as a means of controlling urban deer populations for economic reasons, if for no other, in many places. What we hope for and want is urban deer control must be comprehensive, however, and use holistic and integrated approaches. And this is a condition we feel should exist, but it rarely does. And ultimately, people in the affected communities will make decisions about deer management, and they must have choices. They must have choices in front of them. And this is where the aircraft carrier really has to be turned. The traditional science and management community has not supported alternatives as well as it should. So with all this in mind, what are the minimal conditions that urban deer programs must meet? And first, they must be humane. The public demands that wild animals be treated humanely and not be made to suffer or killed unnecessarily. Second, they must be justified. The reasoning behind them must be sound. Third, fourth, and fifth, they have to be achievable, effective, and efficient. If an urban deer hunt, population reduction action, or cull is said to be justified as a means of reducing documented conflicts, then it must target the deer causing those conflicts. If it's said to be justified as a means of population control, then it must target the removal of females. And sixth, programs must be evaluated regularly and constantly demonstrated to be justified. Hunts and culls should not become institutionalized and conducted because this is the way we do things, in quotes. The placebo effect, where people think things are getting better because somebody's taking action or taking an action, is a real threat with deer management programs and needs to be empirically demonstrated not to be influencing the program itself. So much of this already fits in with a sort of classical and existing integrated pest management models and frameworks, and where many of these same steps are taken. And a lot of work has been drawn from this IPM, this integrated pest management approach, and applying it to the way we manage wildlife in general. So you want to identify the species, assemble information on the biology and ecology, monitor damage, determine damage thresholds, which is a really important when to take action, determining that threshold of when you actually take action, and then choosing the appropriate management option, acting, monitoring, and then evaluating about the success of that program. So that important element is really the emphasis on evaluation. It means that you don't act unless the threshold for action has been crossed. And that approach also syncs up with the National Park Service, what they call their practitioner's approach. And that specific approach that they utilize ensures that important elements like stakeholder involvement, lowest risk programs, and adaptive management approaches are followed. And that's led to more work, and there has been recent work. This is built on what's gone before, including those IPM frameworks, the National Park practitioners' work, and a lot of work that's can be attributed to some scientists in Australia and New Zealand, where they kill a lot more animals than we do. And that's about underpinning some of these management processes and approaches with an ethical framework. And honestly, if that dialogue can occur there, it certainly can and should be occurring here concerning deer. For over a decade now, government, academics, and animal protection folks have proposed approaches to guide ethical decision-making in wildlife control. And really, there is now widespread acknowledgement for ethical and evidence-based approaches to wildlife control. So some of these principles have been described previously, but this paper that was published in 2017 captures what I think is sort of the complete picture. And it's the International Consensus Principles for Ethical Wildlife Control, and it really goes through 7 principles that I'll discuss that in particular underpin our plan template that I'll be talking about. So those 7 principles for ethical wildlife control, the first being modifying human practices when possible, and that requires a long-term education process, but getting to the root cause. Controlling attractants, for instance, it implies, obviously, the need for long-term education with the public. 2, justify the need for control with evidence. Justify that substantial harm is being done, cost to people, damage to property, and it requires reconciling real harms and obviously some probably conflicting values. Have clear and achievable outcome-based objectives. A wildlife control action should be clear. It should be achievable, monitored, and adapted based on lessons learned. 4, it should cause the least harm to animals, a guiding principle. They should predictably and effectively cause the least animal welfare harms. And 5, consider community values and scientific information. Decision to control should be informed by a range of community values alongside scientific, technical, and practical information that's available. 6, include long-term systematic management. Decisions to control wildlife should be integrated into a program of long-term systematic management, not ad hoc knee-jerk reactions. And finally, base control on the specifics of situation, not on negative labels applied to animals, like they're overabundant, they're pests, they're nuisance. So those 7 principles, they capture the models previously described, and they provide this ethical framework for this template plan, this template conflict management plan, and about coexisting with deer. So we just finished drafting it, as I said before, and we intend it to be used by communities, cities, villages, towns, counties, homeowners associations to humanely and effectively prevent and solve conflicts with white-tailed deer. Maybe in concert with some kind of control action that's justified, but also to address the specific conflicts that people have in their communities with deer, and also to help educate the community, to provide a way to distribute information that helps people understand what's more about how these animals are behaving and why, so that they can better understand their own role in attracting and their own understanding of how they're framing these kinds of interactions. So the information in this plan has been gathered from scientific and peer-reviewed articles from experts in the field of human deer conflict resolution and from successful deer conflict management models across the U.S. So we're inviting communities to use this plan as their own or modify it as necessary, however it'll suit the needs of their community. So the goals of this deer conflict management plan are really twofold. One is to provide a framework for evaluating community issues with white-tailed deer first, and two, recommending those step-by-step actions that address conflict with deer through a comprehensive, practical, effective, science-based, humane, long-term, and community-supported plan. So the first part is evaluating and really understanding that what's going on and getting the information necessary to put a plan and a response together, and then make that response very grounded and very connected to what was evaluated. So the end result of putting that plan in place is a community that's more knowledgeable and better equipped to coexist with deer, and even probably other wildlife. Though, of course, we're talking about North America's most abundant large herbivore that's commonly encountered now in urban and suburban areas because of their ability to adapt to human-dominated landscapes. So the plan lays out in detail the root causes of conflicts and reviews these issues in detail and how to address each of them specifically. It's almost a 50-page document, and it has appendices and references included. I'm not going to go through all of that, obviously, but I do want to cover just some basic, sort of how it's put together and some of the essential things that need to be considered, and discuss that a little bit with you. Again, this plan is, the goal of it is to provide a framework for evaluating community deer issues and taking those step-by-step actions which address deer issues in a comprehensive, humane, and a community-supported manner. So it goes to the roots of conflict between deer and people, yard and garden complaints, the deer-vehicle collision issues, Lyme disease concerns, aggressive deer, biodiversity loss, and forest regeneration. All those components are addressed, and they need to be. So we're advocating for a very comprehensive approach. There is no one solution to conflicts with deer. A good deer conflict mitigation program will be comprehensive and multifaceted to be successful. And the focus really needs to be on managing the deer conflicts, not the deer numbers. So many communities get mired in arguments about how many deer they have and how many deer they want, and they lose sight of more sort of effective and less costly, more publicly acceptable ways to manage deer conflicts. So some of the crucial elements of a deer conflict mitigation plan, and ours in particular, is making sure that the focus is on addressing the root cause of conflicts and using an adaptive management framework, being able to respond to what you're seeing, adapting to it. So the focus needs to be on assessing and defining your community-specific deer-related conflicts. Set clear, achievable, and measurable goals. Some of these things are obviously very similar to the principles we discussed earlier. The goals need to be tailored to address the specific conflicts, and clear benchmarks need to be established to assess program success. So we want to use strategies that are long-term and site-specific, avoiding quick fix strategies that don't provide long-term benefits. We need to create an ongoing monitoring program, a very important, vital part of this plan. A solid monitoring system that can assess whether the program has actually achieved its goals, and seeing what changes need to be made as it proceeds. 5, clearly spelling out the long-term costs and timeline. The public needs to know how much public money is supporting the program, over what time period, and where and when activities will occur. And of course, we've got to ensure the public is part of the process, that they're solicited for their input. Their involvement is really pivotal to program success and community support for the long term and the success of the program. So within the plan, there is a step-by-step guide that, it's a template really, that lays out how to put this plan in place. And it's meant to be very broad, but also you'll be able to take elements of it and make it your own and responsive to the things you're experiencing in your community. So the goal is to create a deer conflict management plan which clearly outlines the community's deer-related conflicts and attempts to solve them in a site-specific manner. Again, the focus needs to be on managing deer conflicts and not deer numbers. So gathering local data, this is the evaluations part. The first 3 steps are evaluating what's going on in your community. And there's a fair amount of information about what kind of data, how to do it, samples of reports and how to set up surveys and et cetera, about gathering that information needed to make decisions. And then once you have that data, where the hotspots are, where problems are occurring, where deer vehicle strikes might be happening, creating those map overlays so you're really aware of where these things are occurring in your community and have some insight on what you can do about them. And then, of course, creating public input channels and keeping the public informed. Understanding how to, either through surveying and a yearly survey with residents or constant, a website where you're constantly updating information about what's occurring with the program and what kind of success it's having and where to get information about resources and about other conflicts that people might be experiencing in their backyard or in their gardens. And step 4 is taking all that information that you're receiving from the public and from the data you've assessed about how the deer are using the habitat in your community, creating an action plan, the response part. And you want to make sure that, of course, you're utilizing a range of non-lethal options that are specifically addressing the conflict. And then, of course, program assessment and monitoring. Very important about how to understand what the impact is and how things are progressing and what kind of success it's having. So going back to gathering local data, there are a number of different ways to conduct resident surveys. You can distribute it through a town, wide mailing, or set up an online survey platform like SurveyMonkey. But these surveys, they need to be objective and in measuring residents' attitudes towards deer. Collecting deer vehicle collision data, there are examples of reporting forms and other information on how that data might be accessed. They're utilizing some sort of complaint reporting system from residents. That's also in the plan, that examples in the appendices about what that looks like and what part of the complaint, where it is, what took place, the response, what can be done, follow-up, all of that is covered in there as well. And then collecting info on the location and type of the deer attractants, where they are, what's occurring, where hotspots might be. And that goes hand in hand with sort of assessing the deer habitat in general. And then, identifying any feeding stations or feeders in that area. So creating map overlays, plotting this type of data will give you a clear picture of what and where your community's specific deer conflicts are and where solutions can be applied in a site-specific manner. So you're getting information on accident hotspots, location and type of complaints, location of deer feeding activities, location of attractants that entice deer into roadways. Again, creating the public input channels, conducting the resident survey as we talked about before. Again, these first 3 steps are about evaluation and understanding what's going on so that you can respond properly. Setting up a deer task force, having some kind of committee or group that can take this on, having open public forums, presenting this information, resources on this issue, and accessible information to the public, and keeping them informed as you go. Creating the action plan is totally predicated on the evaluation of the phase and what's going on, and you're going to set out the action plan as approved by the Deer Task Force potentially, and community leaders, and of course, it's going to be based on public input. We suggest and have seen that programs are successful when they have one person or coordinator that's in charge of overseeing the deer program, some kind of deer program coordinator, and the program should be promoted as something that can be achievable with some effort on the part of all residents, and something that they're all working towards and learning about. And it's something that can bring about, a harmonious relationship between residents and their community wildlife in general. So again, those community, the components of the action plan should be specific, they should be measurable, and certainly specific to the root causes of conflict with deer in the community. So public education, hosting deer-resistant gardening workshops, and having that list of native plants that are resistant to deer, promoting deer-resistant flower and ornamental, I don't know why special's in there, and all the community displays, set up town study plots to see what the deer are eating and what they're not eating, show people how to do those kinds of deer-resistant gardening and planting, and then host the deer-proofing demonstration days, where you can show people how to keep deer out of certain areas that were not wanted or reduce their impact in others. And that there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. Obviously, the deer vehicle collisions is a very significant issue. It's important to do educational outreach about driver awareness during the rut and fawn rearing periods, providing education material for new driver education programs even, reducing visual barriers on roadways, treating collision hotspots, putting signage and keeping that signage fresh and new, and so people don't just let it blend into the background. Transmitting that information through community networks so that people are aware and reminded of what these animals are doing and when, and how they can avoid conflict with them, especially by not running into them. Set up and maintaining an accident reporting system to see if what you're doing is actually reducing those deer vehicle strikes. And potentially investing possible salt replacement alternatives for winter when it's causing attraction issues. So once that local deer collision data has been collected and analyzed, these solutions really can be applied. One community in particular does a really great job of it, Rochester Hills, Michigan. They have a Don't Veer for Deer campaign. It's a great model to follow, and we reference it with a link in our plan. So continuing with the action plan, there's a number of things and resources to go through on each one of these things. What to do about deer feeders, what to do about Lyme disease, how to educate people about reducing risk of being bitten by a tick, and providing more information about that disease, that complex disease, and the process in the community. And discuss as well biodiversity issues and how deer impact them or don't impact them. And also deal potentially with any kind of aggressive or habituated deer that might be present. And often what occurs in the springtime are people kidnapping fawns or thinking that they're not being taken care of by moms, so they bring them in, and the more information, the better. My experience in general with the public and wildlife is that they completely misunderstand and misinterpret what wild animals are doing and what they should do for them. Even though that most of what the people are responding to, they're doing it out of a big heart, that they actually care about animals in the first place. Step 5, the final step, is the program assessment and monitoring. Setting up this robust complaint and deer car collision reporting system and monitoring over time to see if goals are achieved and if accidents and nuisance complaints decline. Conducting the resident survey every year to measure resident satisfaction and getting feedback so and have an indication of how well the program is succeeding, because it makes a difference that people support it, and it's not just that it's having an impact on reducing deer conflict is about what people actually perceive about it. Does it really getting that information out there? And evaluating how the program is proceeding and making those changes when necessary. So again, the template plan has appendices that detail sample complaint and collision reporting forms, and I'm really hoping that many of you will take a look at the plan and try to incorporate elements of it in your community if it fits. And of course, I would certainly appreciate any feedback you might have once you've read, and we'd be really happy to hear about any information you might have if you are trying to implement, or if you've implemented some other kind of plan that's working effectively for you. I'd certainly like to know what is working for your community and what you're having success with. And that's something, again, I can email out to any requests or any other information you want to know about what I presented today. This is my email address, jgriffin@humanesociety.org. And again, I want to thank the Botsteber Institute for the opportunity to present, and my HSUS colleagues in our Urban Wildlife section for producing the plan, and to the many authors and supporters and institutions that helped produce it as well.